CD audio read by Rob Scarborough, March 2020, all rights reserved. I thought I taught a tortoise, but the tortoise taught me. Thomas Scrambles was an old man who liked to sit in his chair, rocking back and forth, sipping tea. Every so often he would drop off to sleep, and the mug handle would slip down in his hand, splashing liquid over the edge onto a large pebble-shaped object on the floor. But it wasn't really a pebble at all. It was old Tom's pet tortoise, which he had had ever since he was a boy. Harry and Louise were Tom's grandchildren, and they knelt at his feet, playing happily with their toys. All of a sudden, old Tom's grip strengthened, as, waking with a start, he put his mug down, waved a finger in the air, and began loudly recalling a long-lost memory.
Thomas Scrambles, that's my name, and my pet tortoise is called Whizzer. But before that, he had a different name, you know. Yes, I remember now. I called him Wood at first because he was so slow. Just like a block of wood, hardly ever moved. But then something magical happened, and he became so fast, which is why I renamed him Whizzer. Would you like to hear how Wood earned the name Whizzer and became a superhero to save the day?
Harry and Louise stopped playing, nodded, and climbed onto his knee, ready for him to begin. Their grandpa's eyes lit up fiercely with the flashback to his childhood gaining strength, and he recited the tale excitedly to both grandchildren.
Well now, it all started when I was about 7 years old and realised that I wanted a pet of my own. One day, Mum was in the kitchen baking cakes, and I plucked up the courage to ask her.
"Mum, please let me have a pet," I pleaded. "Well, Thomas, if you promise to look after it, maybe we'll go to the pet shop tomorrow and see what they have," said Mum.
That night I lay awake in bed, my head full of visions of the animals that I would love to care for and play with. A cat or a dog, a rabbit, or even a gerbil. But my dreams were not even close to what really lay in store for me, and next day the shopkeeper held the lapels of his brown coat, pursing his lips as he spoke. "How about a tortoise for you, Thomas? They're easy to look after and live for 100 years. Ideal for a young lad like you."
"What a good idea,"
said Mum, before I could object or suggest anything else, and minutes later we were in the car on our way home. As we drove along the country lanes, I couldn't help thinking about what I really wanted, which was a more exciting pet, not a boring old tortoise. A few days later, Dad had fitted a fence around our garden so that the tortoise could wander about without escaping, and I put him down to watch what happened. As it ambled to and fro, a wrinkly head popped in and out of the mottled shell, chewing dandelion leaves, until Dad sat down in a garden chair, stretching out a foot temptingly. The tortoise plodded straight over and nibbled his toes, which made him jump out of his skin and me laugh out loud.
"It's tea time!"
shouted Mum a little while later, and off I ran indoors, leaving the tortoise on the grass. But after tea, my pet was nowhere to be seen. I looked under all the bushes, behind the barbecue, and in a pile of leaves blown into a corner by the wind, with no sign of my tortoise anywhere.
"He'll not have gone far. He's only a tortoise," said Dad, "and we all know that they are as slow as wood." "What do you mean, slow as wood?" "Well, wood doesn't move very much, and neither does your pet. Even living trees only sway a little bit in the wind, and they take ages to grow, just like your tortoise will." With that, Dad picked up his newspaper and carried on reading. I decided to ask Mum for help and found her in the kitchen. "Mum, the tortoise has gone missing. We've looked everywhere. Can I have a dog now?" "No, you can't. Come on, Thomas. We'll look together."
As we walked down the long garden, I remembered what my father had said earlier.
Dad says Tortoises are slow as wood, which is why I've decided to call him Wood.
Mum agreed that that was a very suitable name, but just then we passed the fish pond, and I stopped to peer into the water, asking nervously,
"Can tortoises swim?" "No, I'm afraid not."
Shaking her head hard, Mum went on to explain.
"Turtles can, but not tortoises, even though they look similar. Don't worry, though. The pond is too high for Wood's little legs to reach."
We arrived at the compost heap next and searched all around it. A cloud of steam was rising from the middle, and that gave me an idea.
"Maybe Wood's in there where it's nice and warm."
We both prodded the soggy pile with sticks, but found no sign of a tortoise. I was starting to get really worried. We were nearly at the end of the garden, when suddenly there was a rustly scratching sound coming from the foot of a large horse-chestnut tree which overhung the iron railing fence. There was Wood, pushing his way into a small dark hole at the base of the trunk, and I shouted, running ahead to pull him back out of the hole.
"How did he get all the way down here so quickly, Wood?"
I asked, but he just blinked a small dark eye, as if winking, and Mum laughed.
"Perhaps your pet is not as slow as you thought. Well, it looks as though Wood has found a nice cosy nest down here anyway, so that's good."
Together we collected some dry leaves, and then Dad arrived with cardboard and newspaper, which we tore into shreds to push inside the hole at the foot of the conker tree.
"Your tortoise will soon arrange that lot to make himself comfy, but goodness knows how he got down here so fast," said Dad.
Later on in bed, I lay awake, puzzled by Wood's seemingly amazing speed, and feeling quite pleased with my new pet. He didn't seem to be the least bit boring, after all. The next day was a school day. At break, we always played Tig Scarecrow, but with me being the slowest runner in class, I spent most of the time tigged with my arms out, and no one ever seemed to want me on their team. They knew that I could never dodge nor catch anyone. Matters were made worse when our class teacher, Miss Killjoy, announced the date of school sports day, and also added that we were to have a pet racing event that particular year. All of my classmates were abuzz, leaving me scared, knowing that I had no chance in my race, and that Wood would certainly be the slowest pet too, unless someone turned up with a snail, of course. We were doomed to be double losers. A few days later, I remember having breakfast outside in the sunshine and telling Dad of my worry that both my pet and I were going to be last in the school races. His reply wasn't the least bit helpful.
"Well, Tom, entering a tortoise into a sprint race definitely smells like a recipe for disaster. Unless you can teach it to use roller skates, of course." "Really? Do you think I could?"
Dad's chuckles became raucous laughter at the thought that I had taken him seriously, and he fell onto the lawn in hysterics. After calming down, he tried to be a little more helpful.
"Well, Tom, you know what they say, practice makes perfect, so maybe with a bit of training you could improve. But remember, winning isn't everything. Trying your best is what really counts."
I looked down at my skinny legs, deciding that Dad was right, and headed out into the hot summer sunshine for some serious practice.
"Right, Wood, let's teach you to go faster. Follow me."
I jogged off, but looking around, Wood had plodded away in the opposite direction.
"Oh, please run with me."
As I begged, Wood seemed to raise an eyebrow, as if suddenly understanding what I meant. But it must have been my imagination, because everyone knows tortoises don't have eyebrows. Anyway, he was still only moving at a snail's pace, and we needed to go much quicker to have any chance of not finishing last in both of the school races. I felt desperate, but remembering Dad's earlier words, a crazy plan sprung to mind. Fetching one roller skate, I placed wood on board, tied some string around the axle, and prepared to show him what speed really felt like, in the hope that he would be inspired. We set off down the garden at such a sprint that by the time we reached the conker tree, I was tired out and collapsed on the grass, watching as Wood clawed his way out of the roller skate before doddering off towards his home in the tree trunk. It seemed the ride had taught him nothing about the need for speed, and full of disappointment, I laid back on the grass. Moments later, I was fast asleep. I awoke with a start as large drops of rain splashed onto my face and the wind took on a ferocious, gusty strength. There was a loud rumble of thunder coming from a huge black cloud directly overhead, which reminded me that under a tree is not a good place to be during a storm. Jumping up, I darted from beneath the branches just as a jagged electrical flash lit the sky. The lightning bolt hit the tree with a massive crack, forcing me to dive onto the wet grass as a tearing sound came from the trunk. A ferocious beam of white-hot light exploded into a line of orange flames which crackled against the dry bark. But the fire was quickly put out by sizzling rain, propelled by driving wind, until seconds later the storm was gone and the sun was back out. The tree was left with a smouldering black scar on its trunk and a huddle of brown scorched leaves at the top. But the real shock was still to come. A round object flew from the very hole that my pet had made his home at the base of the thunderstruck tree. Spinning like a wheel towards me across the grass, little legs and a head could be seen popping in and out as each of 4 clawed feet scratched at the lawn in turn before disappearing back inside. It was Wood, pulling his shell forwards on its edge and cartwheeling right past my nose. Within seconds, my tortoise was spinning so fast he mowed grass. 1,000 blades of green sprayed up from the shell in all directions as Wood bombed off across the lawn in a slight curve caused by the off-centre shape of his domed home. Utterly astonished, I picked myself up and quickly gave chase, stretching my legs to follow the blurred shape around the garden. A haze of grass clippings flew in my face, but not for long, because soon I had to look back over my shoulder as the lightning-powered tortoise came up from behind to lap me. Enjoying my running and stretching my legs, I swung my arms in time, travelling much more quickly than ever before. Yet still I could not keep up with a mere tortoise. As I chased around the long garden, I remember laughing and panting in equal measure, then making an excited promise.
Wood must be renamed. I'm going to call him Whizzer from now on because of the way he keeps whizzing past me. Wow, there he goes again, the fastest tortoise ever.
I still can't believe what happened that day, but from then on, whenever we went into the garden to practice for the race, Whizzer lived up to his new name. He would start with a little shuffle and then, as if by magic, push 2 legs hard down on the floor to flick his shell up onto its side. Beginning to cartwheel, his head would disappear inside, with little legs dragging him forward in a spinning motion, overtaking me time and time again, however hard I tried. I spent many hours happily chasing Whizzer around the garden, and Mum and Dad never found out what had happened on the day of the storm, even when Dad noticed the lightning-scarred tree. On that particular day, he stalked around the garden, looking very puzzled indeed, before turning to me suspiciously.
"Has someone been using my lawnmower, or has the grass just stopped growing? And what's that long black mark on the conker tree at the bottom of the garden?"
I think the tree got struck by lightning in the storm a few days ago, Dad. Maybe it affected the grass growth, in a sort of electric shock reaction.
I smiled hopefully and turned to Whizzer, winking. I'm sure Dad didn't believe me, but he said nothing more about it. Perhaps he was just pleased for a break in mowing the lawn. A few weeks later at school, everyone was getting mightily excited at the prospect of Sports Day, and as expected, I was being teased, having always been the slowest runner in class. My friends definitely thought the Tortoise would come last too, but I was determined to prove them wrong and practised hard with Whizzer whenever we were alone. A couple of weeks before race day, something very strange happened. It began with lots of rain showers. Day after day, the grass on the school field grew and grew, but no one could cut it because it was so wet. "This juicy grass just clogs my mower," said the caretaker time and time again. But with Sports Day fast approaching, one final effort was made. The mower grunted as it chewed, and the tractor wheels sank until the whole contraption jammed all together, grinding to a halt in a muddy mess. There was to be no grass mown that day, and things were looking grim for the event. The next morning an announcement was made in assembly.
"School Sports Day will be cancelled unless the grass can be cut tomorrow at the latest, and the weather forecast gives rain again, so it doesn't seem likely, I'm afraid."
Miss Killjoy's words were greeted with groans of disappointment, but I knew someone who might just be able to save the day. During the evening I made an excuse to Mum that I was going to the village swings, and then ran to the deserted school playing field clutching Whizzer. The grass was soaking wet and nearly up to my knees, but I started running anyway, calling out to Whizzer.
"Come on, please help me."
Sure enough, he gathered speed and was soon spinning on ahead of me around the school field, until finally his shell edge began to mow the dense wet grass. Lengthy clippings sprayed in all directions, forming a thick haze which blasted me like a green blizzard. I was amazed at Whizzer's ability to tackle the tough stems, just like a proper lawnmower, but without sinking into the wet ground. Before long, a large patch of grass was mown, which looked like a giant crop circle. With the job done, there was plenty of room to mark out the school field ready for Sports Day, and after we'd finished, I quickly gathered Whizzer up and returned home, carrying on as though nothing had happened. The next day in assembly, an astonished Miss Killjoy spoke to the whole school again.
"Miraculously, the school pitch has been mown overnight, perhaps by some sort of superhero. The competition will be taking place after all."
There was a loud cheer, and I felt quietly proud of my super-duper Tortoise. Now it was just a case of not being last in the actual races. Finally, school sports day arrived, and everyone from our class lined up for the children's sprint race. Jake, who had won the previous year, soon took the lead, but amazingly I found that I could keep up ahead of Becky in third. At one point it looked as if I might actually win, and Jake glanced nervously at me out of the corner of his eye. He even stretched out his arms as if to hold me back. At the ribbon, Becky made a late charge and overtook me to finish second behind Jake, but I was more than pleased with my third place. After we had all got our breath back, my friends came over to me with startled expressions, and Jake spoke loudly in a fierce voice. "Thomas Scrambles, you are dangerous!" Then he smiled and added in a softer voice, "You can be on my TIG team any time." I grinned back at him with a new sense of confidence. "No, you can be on mine." All that remained was the pet event, and first to go were the dogs and cats, followed by the small animals category. Each pet had its own fenced-off lane, with owners allowed to encourage their pets using small nibbles of food. Becky's hamster was in the next row to Whizzer, and then Jake's pet snake. A white rabbit and a gerbil made up the race. Before we began, Becky wandered over and started talking.
Well done for coming third, but your tortoise is bound to come last this time. What's he called, anyway?
Whizzer, I replied.
Fancy naming a tortoise that! You're so funny.
I grinned back and gave Whizzer the thumbs up, imagining the smile being wiped off her face as he zoomed past all the other pets, spinning on the edge of his shell and showering grass clippings all over them. The race began with a hopping rabbit soon out in front, followed by slithering snake, galloping gerbil, hopeful hamster, and in last place, my Whizzer. Despite me begging, he just kept on plodding. I could not understand why he was not cartwheeling to victory as he had done at the sports field the night before. Eventually, with the others approaching the finish, I held my hands up in despair, but at the very last second, Becky's hamster turned around for no apparent reason and headed off, back down the course, zigzagging and sniffing the grass as it went. All of the other pets had finished before Becky could persuade her hamster back to cross the line. Whizzer was not last after all, and I cheered loudly. It was then that I noticed Becky, and she was looking sad, so I went over to comfort her.
Don't worry, Becky. Your hamster tried its best. That's the main thing.
Becky cheered up a bit and gave me a little smile.
I was wrong about your tortoise. He might not be fast, but at least he kept going, and in the right direction too. Have you been training him?
I laughed along with her for a second before replying shyly.
Well, we have been practicing together, and I did try to teach him about the need for speed, without any success. But when our cockatoo got struck by lightning a few weeks back, something magical seemed to happen, because he suddenly learned to spin on the edge of his shell like a wheel. Since then, I've spent most of my time chasing him around the garden.
Finishing my unlikely story, I remember looking into Becky's shining eyes and could tell she believed me, even though it sounded so strange.
Perhaps the lightning power turned him into some sort of magic tortoise then, she gabbled excitedly.
It was such a big relief to have told someone about the thunderstorm event that I blurted out more of my secrets to Becky.
I think Whizzer only performs his magical spinny thing in secret when someone needs help. Like when he mowed the sports field after no one else could manage it. Did he do that? Wow! He's definitely a secret superhero tortoise then, cried Becky in amazement.
Bowing our heads, we went quiet until at exactly the same moment, looking up to begin a slow chant. The very same words had entered both our heads at exactly the same time, as if by magic.
In times of need, he helps with speed, and spinning fast, he mows the grass. That's Whizzer the lightning tortoise.
Afterwards I blushed, knowing that Becky and I would always be best friends with a special secret to share. And magic or no magic, what had really happened all of those years ago was, I thought I taught a tortoise, but the tortoise taught me. It's always best to keep on trying, because you never know when a little bit of magic will come along to help you out.
This was the end of Grandpa's story, and at that moment Grandma came into the room, slowly walking over to sit in a rocking chair next to old Tom. Of course it was Becky, and after their childhood friendship they had married and remained together ever since.
"Have you been telling stories from when we were children again, dear?" she said quietly.
The pebble on the floor suddenly moved, and a wrinkled, leathery head emerged from inside. It was Whizzer, and he looked up to give a knowing little wink before popping back inside his cosy lawnmower home.
until the next time someone needed help from a lightning-powered, shell-spinning super tortoise. The end. Thanks for listening, and to hear more of my stories, visit my Facebook page, @RobScarborough Author. Copyright 2020, recorded during lockdown, March 2020.